The radar screen flickered once, then went dark. On the open sea, a Russian ship that believed it was untouchable was suddenly blind, confused, and seconds away from disaster. There were no fighter jets overhead, no warning shots, no chance to retreat. What struck next didn't come from the horizon. It came from the sky, silent and precise. Small Ukrainian drones, barely visible against the clouds, closed in with ruthless coordination. Each one carried just enough firepower to turn steel decks into burning wreckage. Crew members ran, alarms screamed, but modern naval armor meant nothing against eyes in the sky that never blinked. In less time than it takes to launch a missile, the ship's fate was sealed. This wasn't just an attack. This was a message about how war at sea has changed forever. The Russian ship entered the patrol zone with confidence bordering on arrogance. Its radar systems were active, electronic countermeasures humming steadily, and the crew followed a routine they had practiced countless times before. This stretch of water had been crossed safely again and again. Larger threats, submarines, missiles, enemy aircraft, were what they trained for. Small drones were not considered a serious danger. That assumption would prove fatal. Miles away, Ukrainian operators watched the vessel on their screens. The ship was not just a target. It was a symbol of dominance, of intimidation, of a navy that still believed size and armor guaranteed survival. The plan was already in motion. This would not be a single reckless strike, but a carefully layered attack designed to overwhelm defenses before the crew even understood what was happening. The first drones launched quietly. No roar of engines, no visible contrails, just small UAVs skimming low over the sea, using the curvature of the water and the clutter of waves to stay hidden. Their job was not to destroy, but to confuse. As they closed in, electronic warfare payloads activated, flooding the ship's sensors with false returns and ghost signals. Inside the Combat Information Center, confusion spread fast. Radar contacts multiplied, then vanished. Systems briefly dropped offline. Officers shouted for confirmations that never came. Was it a malfunction? A software glitch? The ship slowed slightly, trying to regain situational awareness, exactly the hesitation the attackers needed. Then came the second wave. These drones flew higher, deliberately exposing themselves for just a moment. Air defense gunners opened fire, tracer rounds slicing through the sky. One drone exploded, another veered off course. The crew felt a surge of confidence. They believed the threat had been identified and contained. They were wrong. The real strike force was already descending. Low, fast, and precise, the attack drones slipped through gaps created by the distraction. One slammed into the ship's superstructure, detonating near key communications equipment. Another struck the deck, igniting fuel and scattering burning debris across the surface. Fire suppression systems activated, but damage was spreading faster than crews could respond. Smoke poured into corridors. Power flickered. Internal communications failed. What had started as a routine patrol had turned into a fight for survival in under 2 minutes. From the Ukrainian control screens, the operators saw the ship begin to list. Secondary explosions followed, smaller, sharper flashes that confirmed critical systems were compromised. This was no longer harassment. The ship was losing the battle to stay afloat. And the most terrifying part for the crew was still to come. As flames spread across the deck, the Russian crew scrambled to contain the damage, but the ship was already bleeding systems. Fire doors jammed halfway shut. Emergency generators kicked in, then failed as cables burned through. Orders were shouted down smoke-filled corridors, yet few of them reached their destination. The chain of command was breaking down in real time. On the bridge, officers tried to assess the situation with fragments of information. Visual feeds were gone. Radar was unreliable. The ship's defensive weapons, designed to counter missiles and aircraft, struggled to track targets no bigger than birds. Every second of delay allowed the attackers to tighten their grip. Then, the third wave arrived. These drones did not rush. They circled just outside the ship's effective firing range, adjusting angles, waiting for the exact moment when defenses were weakest. One by one, they dived. A drone struck near the waterline, punching through thin hull plating before detonating inside. The blast sent seawater flooding into lower compartments. Damage control teams ran toward the breach, only to be driven back by heat and smoke. Another impact hit the stern. Propulsion systems shuddered violently, then went silent. The ship lost forward momentum and began drifting, helpless, its profile now an easy target against the open sea. The realization spread among the crew with chilling clarity. This was no longer an attack they could repel. It was an execution. Panic followed discipline. Some sailors abandoned their posts to help wounded comrades. Others froze, staring at fires they could not extinguish. Lifeboats were prepared, but the order to abandon ship never came. Command still hoped the vessel could be saved, that help might arrive, that the drones would stop. They did not. A final strike tore into the midsection, triggering a massive internal explosion. The shockwave rippled through the hull, knocking men off their feet. The ship lurched hard to one side, water pouring in faster than pumps could handle. The list became unmistakable. From a distance, Ukrainian operators watched the outcome they had predicted. The vessel that once projected power now burned silently. Its fate, sealed not by a fleet, but by a handful of machines guided from afar. Within minutes, the sea began to claim the ship, and with it, the old rules of naval warfare. As the ship continued to list, reality finally overcame denial. The captain issued the order that no naval officer ever wants to give. Prepare to abandon ship. It came too late to restore control, but just early enough to save lives. Crew members rushed to lifeboat stations as smoke thickened and metal groaned under structural stress. The sea, once calm, now reflected the orange glow of fires consuming the vessel. Below deck, compartments were fully flooded. Ammunition storage areas had been isolated just in time, preventing an even larger catastrophe. Still, secondary explosions echoed through the hull, each one signaling another system lost, another boundary breached. The ship was no longer a warship. It was a sinking hazard. Above the scene, Ukrainian drones remained on station. They did not attack again. There was no need. Their mission parameters had been met. Sensors confirmed the ship's loss of propulsion, catastrophic flooding, and irreversible list. From a tactical standpoint, the engagement was over. This restraint was intentional. The objective was not annihilation for spectacle, but removal of a strategic asset. Every additional strike would risk unnecessary casualties and complicate recovery operations. Modern warfare, in this instance, was cold, calculated, and ruthlessly efficient. As lifeboats hit the water, the ship's bow dipped sharply. Seawater surged over the deck, extinguishing fires with violent bursts of steam. Within moments, the vessel rolled onto its side, exposing its scarred hull to the sky. Then, slowly, it slipped beneath the surface. There was no dramatic final explosion, no cinematic fireball, just silence. Miles away, Ukrainian operators logged the final telemetry and shut down their control feeds. Another Russian naval asset was gone, not because it faced a larger fleet, but because it underestimated a new kind of threat. The sinking sent a shock far beyond the immediate battlefield. Naval planners around the world would replay this engagement frame by frame, asking the same uncomfortable question. If a modern warship could be defeated this quickly, this cheaply, and this quietly, what was truly safe at sea anymore? News of the sinking spread faster than the wreckage itself. Within hours, satellite images began circulating, showing a dark oil stain and scattered debris where the ship had once sailed with confidence. Official statements attempted to control the narrative. Technical failure, minor damage, crew evacuated safely. But the evidence told a different story. Analysts didn't need classified briefings to understand what had happened. The pattern was unmistakable. This was not an accident. It was a demonstration. Military experts broke down the engagement step by step. Low-cost drones had bypassed layered air defenses. Electronic warfare had blinded sensors built to detect billion-dollar threats. Precision strikes had targeted vulnerabilities rather than armor. The result was devastating efficiency. A ship that took years to build and millions to maintain had been neutralized in minutes by systems that could be assembled in garages and controlled from hundreds of kilometers away. Inside naval headquarters across the world, the mood shifted from curiosity to concern. If drones could sink a warship in contested waters, what about ports? What about carrier groups? What about fleets that relied on legacy doctrine? Big ships, big guns, big radars. The old assumptions no longer held. For Russia, the loss carried psychological weight far beyond the material damage. Crews still at sea began operating differently, more cautiously, more nervously. Every unidentified blip became a potential threat. Every quiet horizon felt hostile. Dominance had been replaced by doubt. For Ukraine, the street key reinforced a growing reality. Innovation could offset numbers. Precision could replace mass. And control of the battle space no longer belonged exclusively to those with the largest fleets, but to those who adapted the fastest. The sea had not just claimed a ship that day. It had exposed a shift in power. One that could not be patched, denied, or sunk with it. In the days that followed, the implications of the attack grew heavier. Naval commanders began quietly revising patrol patterns, extending standoff distances, and restricting movements in waters once considered routine. Ships that previously sailed with visible confidence now operated under constant tension. Lookouts scanned the sky as often as the horizon. Electronic warfare systems stayed active longer, draining power and attention. The psychological cost was immediate and unavoidable. What made the strike so unsettling was not just the loss of the ship, but the imbalance it revealed. Traditional naval warfare had always favored scale. Bigger hulls, thicker armor, longer-range weapons. But this engagement flipped that logic entirely. The attackers did not need air superiority, submarines, or surface fleets. They needed coordination, patience, and precision. The drones were expendable. The ship was not. Defense analysts noted another uncomfortable truth. Even if every drone in the attack had been destroyed, the cost exchange would still have favored the attackers. A single modern warship represents years of investment, training, and logistics. The drones that struck it could be replaced in days. That equation terrified planners more than the footage itself. For sailors still deployed at sea, the lesson was personal. The enemy was no longer something you could always see, hear, or outrun. It could be silent, remote, and persistent, watching for hours, waiting for one mistake. The ocean, once a buffer of safety, had become an open vulnerability. The attack marked a turning point, not because it was the first ship ever sunk by drones, but because it proved how decisively the balance had shifted. Naval power was no longer defined by who controlled the biggest fleet, but by who controlled information, timing, and adaptation. And as the wreck settled on the seabed, one fact became impossible to ignore. At sea, the future of warfare had already arrived, and it was unmanned. Long after the flames were gone and the sea had closed over the wreck, the shock of the attack continued to ripple outward. What happened that day was not just the loss of a Russian ship, it was the public collapse of an old belief that large warships could dominate simply by existing. For decades, naval power meant visibility, flags flying high, steel hulls projecting strength across open water. But Ukrainian drones proved that modern dominance no longer needs to be seen. It only needs to be precise. Silent sensors, Remote operators and disposable platforms combined into a weapon system that outthought, outweighted, and ultimately outmatched a conventional warship. The crew survived, but the lesson did not. Every Navy watching understood the same truth. Defenses built for missiles and aircraft are not enough anymore. The sky is crowded, the sea is transparent, and the smallest threat can now deliver the most decisive blow. This strike will be studied in war colleges and command centers for years, not because it was dramatic, but because it was efficient. No heroic charge, no overwhelming barrage, just a clean, calculated dismantling of a platform that once symbolized power. The Russian ship sank in silence, but the message it carried was deafening. Naval warfare has entered a new era, and there is no going back. If you want more real combat breakdowns that show how modern warfare is changing right in front of us, subscribe now and stay sharp.